When Jesus chose his 12 apostles, he chose some men with quite different views, different from one another, that is. He chose Simon, and he chose Matthew. Simon was a zealot. The zealots hated the Romans. They tried to stir up the Jews to fight against them. After all, if they did go to war, God would be forced to fight on the side of Israel, and no matter how big Rome was, no matter how powerful, Israel would be free of the oppression of the Romans. That's what they claimed. Some of them went so far as to kill prominent Jews and blame it on the Romans, hoping to stir up war. Matthew, on the other hand, was a tax collector. How many times do you read of the pairing of the tax collectors and sinners? Quite a pairing there. The tax collectors had sold out their own people. They were working for the Roman government. And yet Jesus expected these two with such different ideas, concepts, life histories, to sit at his feet, accept his love, and love one another. In Acts chapter 10, Peter had to be convinced with extreme measures that the Gentiles were acceptable to the Lord and could be in the church with the Jews. In Acts chapter 11, he taught that basic idea to some leaders in Jerusalem, and I think he was successful, and yet, in Acts chapter 15, they had to have a church conference and talk about whether these new Gentile converts had to accept the Old Testament law, and the answer came back, well, not very much of it. Jew and Gentile were to sit together. Something was more important than their histories of opposition. Sadly, the differences in people and the problems that arise out of that were not limited to the first century. Several years ago, I was scheduled to preach in a series of meetings in Kentucky in the coal mining country. And before the time for that meeting came, two different factions in the church began to write me. There was some difference, and they each wanted me to see their side. Frankly, I couldn't see the basic point. I didn't think there was anything worth fighting over. And I eventually canceled the meeting, telling them there's no need to try to have an evangelistic effort when you're fighting with one another. They agreed with that. That church split. I asked a brother-in-law who lived in southern Kentucky, what was the real problem up there? What they're talking about really makes no difference. He said, oh, that's coal mining country and it's renegotiation time. Part of the church represents labor and another part of the church represents management, and they don't get along very well. I tell you, there's something more important than labor and management. This is an election year in America, and already the rancor is strong. Democrats hate Republicans, Republicans hate Democrats, and Christians with different ideas are going to sit together, maybe on the same pew. And Jesus expects us to love one another because there's something more important than any earthly government or policy. Even the ones that we think are horrible and sinful. There's something more important, and that is our love. Jesus prayed that his disciples would all be one. That's John chapter 17. Back up to chapter 13, and he tells us how we can love one another when we may be so very different as two men who heard him say that, Simon and Matthew. He said, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. And let's stop right there. That wasn't a new commandment. It's a part of the Old Testament. But listen to him. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you love one another. And then he added, by this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. When I sit down on the pew with someone with a different idea and a different candidate, I need to make sure that I love him and that the way I speak to him and about him shows the world that we are both disciples of the Master.